Gum lesson number 15 is who versus whom, and this will probably be the shortest lesson that we look at all semester. It should be pretty easy to figure out as soon as you kind of know the little trick. So many tricks. So first of all, the difference between these two is that who is the subject of the sentence or the subject of the question. So that means that it's going to be kind of neighbors to the verb in the sentence. So in the example here, you have who stole my dog. The other part of this is the he stole my dog. This is kind of the trick that we're going to use to kind of tell whether or not to use who or whom. If you substitute the word who with he, it should make sense. Or if you were answering the question and you were kind of answering it in the long form, you know, if you said who stole my dog, you might answer he stole my dog. And because that makes sense, we know that we use the correct word. By comparison, if we look at whom, this is the object of the sentence. So if we were to write it out in sentence form, like a regular sentence, we'd probably see the word whom at the end. Because sometimes we're asking questions when we use the words who and whom. A lot of times we'll see whom at the beginning of a sentence though too. So here's an example where you would use it at the end. So the dog belongs to whom? And so in this case, we substitute the word whom with him. So the dog belongs to him. The reason I use he and him and not she and her is because it's that M in him that is there to kind of serve as a reminder that we want to use whom. So this is kind of funny when you start to pay attention to this thing, because a lot of people don't pay attention to who and whom. And so we kind of run into some very famous mistakes. So one of these famous mistakes is the phrase who's who. So sometimes you'll see a book or a magazine or a guide like the who's who of senior high school. And the phrase is actually wrong. It should be who's whom, because you're saying like who's him or he's him, which is a weird thing to say, but it would make a lot more sense to say he's him versus he's he. Maybe not the best example. Guess who is another one, if you remember that game where you have the little faces and you had to flip them down. And in that one, it's guess who, but it should be guess whom. But again, nobody corrects this, nobody changes it, but that's kind of the big difference here. So another one that you might see is like if you ask like, who are you taking to prom? Or whom are you dating? Or who are you dating? You should say, whom are you taking to prom? And whom are you dating? And in case you didn't know, that's what guess who looks like. All right, so that's pretty much it. As long as you substitute those words and you kind of like repeat or reread the sentence in a way, you might have to kind of move things around a little bit. But once you do that, if it makes sense, then you know that you're using the correct word. So we got a little who's who owl here. So the trick here, of course, the whole thing, bottom line, is do that substitution method. Change who for he and whom for he. And like I said, if your sentence makes sense, then you're in a good place. So the other thing to kind of keep in mind is that who is the subject. So oftentimes you're going to see the verb right next to that word. So like it says there, most times they are neighbors. Not always, but many times they are. The other, whom, is always going to be the object of the sentence. And again, it's kind of like whoever takes the action in the sentence. That is the, I don't know, that's the subject. And if the action is happening to something else or happening to another noun, then that is the object. Like I said, that's why we go with substitution, is because that whole object-subject thing gets confusing. But if you substitute, that's probably going to make the most sense. So that's who versus whom.